Well, it's never too early to start troubleshooting our electoral process. After all, the politicians have already started preparing for the elections. In fact, they started from day one for those who won elections. And for those who lost, of course, you can understand that they regrouped already. And they're trying to get that #1 seat, depending on where it is they're running for. So how well are we doing regarding election management? Well, Yaga Africa has been tracking this for as long as we can remember, and they have some more updates, the outcome of a lot of work they've done, just trying to look at the system, the flaws, the strengths, and how we can build on Nigeria's democracy by way of our elections. We're joined on the program by the Executive Director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo, who's live for us in our Abuja studio. Welcome to the Morning Brief, Samson. As I said earlier on, it's never too early to start preparing and troubleshooting elections. So are you trying to beat the politicians to their game as well, so our electoral process is ready for whatever it is they may be planning as well, Samson?
Well, we're not trying to beat the politicians to their game. We're just trying to protect Nigeria's democracy. And more importantly, give citizens the confidence that their votes count, that in a democracy, people matter. And we're just about 723 days to the 2027 elections. 2025 is a very critical year because we're just 2 years down the line. This week, a few days ago was 25th of February, and that marks 2 years after the 2023 elections, and it's just 2 years to the 2027 elections, because the 2027 elections will hold, we believe, on the 20th of February. So it's preparation time, and that's why at Yaga Africa we've been studying what really happened in the 2023 elections as it relates to citizens' participation or voter turnout. And we're asking the question whether Nigerians are voting and how many of them are showing up to vote at elections, with a view, to ensuring that more people turn up to vote. As you can see from the screen, in the last election in 2023, we recorded the lowest turnout in our history. And that is very, very sad because that's an election where Nigeria spent huge amounts of money, over 300 billion naira. It was an election, that we all were very expectant, and there were a lot of reforms introduced before the election.
So Samson, just quickly,
and today.
Right, pardon me. Before we get deeper into the figures, something for me is conspicuously missing, and you forgive me for bringing it up. It's because of some of the old wounds that were opened recently. I know you're going back to 1999, but for some people, it goes back to 1993. Right. So I don't know if there's some sort of nexus we can get from the 1993 elections. Yes, so you're not trying to beat them to it, but obviously the 1993 elections should also be sort of relevant now that there's been some sort of admittance, well, no apology. So does this in any way matter when you look at the election journey of Nigeria? If you catch my drift here, we'll still talk about your data, but I just wanted to situate that 1993 election and IBB's recent book.
No, when you look at the 1993 elections, it's touted as one of the, most credible in our history. But when you compare in terms of turnout, if you compare the 1993 elections down till date, in fact, we went as far back as 1979. When you look at the full report, which we released today on voter turnout, the highest that we have recorded was in 2003, where we had 61% turnout. So when you think about turnout, it wasn't as high as 2003. But when you look at the quality of the elections, and some have talked about option A4, for that time it was perhaps the best procedure to guarantee, that citizens participate, and that the outcome was a reflection, the will of the people. Yes, former president, head of state rather, IBB has come and acknowledged that, yes, looking at the figures, the late Moshood Bashir Abiola did win that election. Yes, yes, he's finally admitted, but it is clear that not just haste, but a dangerous and perhaps a very devastating action was taken to undermine Nigeria's democracy. And it's really unfortunate. And I think that that admittance should not be swept under the carpet, that where the votes of Nigerians, and their will, was taken from them by a military head of state, it's really unacceptable, because that election did produce a leader that enjoyed the vast majority and support from a lot of Nigerians. So even though it's too late in the game, but I don't think it is something that we should sweep under the carpet.
Mr. Itodo, so let's explore some of the things you have reeled out in this report. Maybe give you some time to look at it. But I'm interested in your findings and what actually drives turnout. So in looking at the spectrum of what you do, what you have done with this report as quickly as possible, I want you to especially speak to that finding, what drives turnout.
First, thanks, Geoffrey. I think we need to acknowledge that Nigeria's democracy is the biggest in Africa, but it has the lowest turnout, and that isn't a good development. And there are a few issues that drive turnout. So what we did in this new research is to propose a theoretical framework for understanding turnout. First, you need to look at autonomy factors, and autonomy factors just relates to, there are certain factors that determine the capacity of voters to make individual choices, either as a result of their interests, their knowledge, as well as their motivations. One of them is confidence in the electoral process. If people don't trust that their vote will count, they will not show up at elections. The second relates to access, to voting services. In the build-up, to the 2023 elections, INEC introduced a lot of reforms. And one of the paradox that we are explaining is that how come that despite the reforms, despite BVAS, despite IRF, despite new polling units that were created to take polling stations close to people, we still recorded 27%, turnout at the last election. So there is a disconnect between the higher level of voter registration as well as the turnout for elections. The second was the whole concept of inducement. Colleagues, one of the revelations from this report is that even though, theoretically you can say vote buying and inducement enhances turnout, what this study has actually demonstrated, that vote buying and inducement does not deliver high turnout as people do expect. And lastly, was the whole concept of responsibility. And responsibility just refers to what duty voters think they owe to candidates and parties. And from this study, it is clear that candidates, presented by political parties have or influence voter behavior. If a candidate is presented by a party that enjoys popular support, the chances that people will show up at elections is very, very high. But there are also issues relating to ethnic and communal affiliation. And we've seen that both the ethnic extraction of voters and their identity shapes how they come out for elections. So these are some of the factors that drive turnout, and we've highlighted also some of the challenges, and we can talk about some of the challenges that impede on the ability of people to show up at elections.
And Mr. Itodo, this is quite telling, because if you consider the report on multidimensional poverty in the country as against what is particularly driving voter turnout, you wonder why the bulk of the poor are not turning out to derive economic incentive in order to be able to exercise their franchise. So it says a lot really about what drives the electoral process, what drives voter turnout during election. But let's go to another aspect of your report, which speaks to the reason for the declining voter turnout. And I wonder if this has, much to do with the confidence or the huge lack of it in the electoral umpire itself. But it's your finding. Speak to it.
Thank you very much. There are a range of factors that are driving the declining turnout in elections. The first one is the disillusionment with democracy. People are unable to connect their participation on election day with the quality of their livelihood. How do you explain that people go through all sorts of harrowing experiences to cast their vote on the day of elections, and then the outcome, even if it's a reflection of the people or not, there's no improvement in their lives? And so people are asking the question, why do we need to show up at elections? Does it really count? The second issue that we've highlighted in this report is that there are fundamental problems with our voters register. And this is where there's a lot of discussion that our voters register is over bloated, that we do not have 93 million registered voters in our voters register. YIGA Africa, recently, we developed a statistical model for assessing whether our voter register is over bloated or is underpopulated. And our finding is that, yes, there are migrants on our voters register, there are unqualified persons on our voters register, and there are errors on our voters register. But INEC needs to audit the voters register. So plus or minus, even if you look at the number of voters who shouldn't be on the voters register, we will still have recorded low turnout. But INEC needs to fix our voters register. The other issue is trust, in the electoral process. People are asking, the bigger challenge that we have for 2027 is whether people trust that their vote will count, whether the challenges with electoral technology, people still have confidence, in electoral technology. And I must say that there's a great need to look at how we build and restore public confidence, and it begins with a new INEC that is composed of individuals that do not have partisan leanings, individuals that have impeccable integrity, and individuals that have competence. Because integrity and non-partisanship is not enough, from our recent experience, that you need people who have skill to manage and deliver quality electoral services in a way that it inspires confidence on the part of people to show up to vote. The other thing is about electronic transmission of results. Nigerians are saying, if you do not transmit results electronically, if you don't use technology, it cannot inspire confidence that will drive people to cast their vote. Our study confirms that majority of Nigerians trust that electoral technology can fix some of the challenges in our electoral process, it can inspire trust, and it can drive them to cast their vote. But electoral technology is not a silver bullet, because it can also be used to undermine their votes.
As I was going to wind down, let's look at how do we reverse all of this. We know that at the end of December or so, Professor Mahmoud should be leaving office. Maybe other national commissioners should be leaving office as well. But I think Kayode has the next question.
It's okay, Jeffrey, and it just follows with what you were saying, Jeffrey. You said we need a new INEC. So I wonder, what does an INEC look like? So we have a chairman, as you said, Jeffrey. What is a new INEC that we need, that we deserve, and we ought to have? What does it look like? I know that there was some reprimand handed down to some commissioners who erred in the previous election. But is that enough for you, Samson? What does that new INEC look like?
A new INEC is an INEC that first, the process of the appointment needs to be reformed. That you need to remove the power of appointing the chair and national commissioners or resident electoral commissioners, from the president. And that's the whole proposal for the ongoing constitutional reforms. But the president, before he constitutes or appoints people into INEC, can he invite the public, to submit whether petitions against people who he proposes to nominate, or call on Nigerians to make proposals on the individuals that should make it to the commission? Secondly, we need to look, the constitutional requirements for appointment into INEC needs to be reviewed. Non-partisanship is one, but secondly, you talk about impeccable integrity. But I've also talked about the need to look at competence and skill. But then we need a process where when people raise objections as to nominations, you can't have a situation where you are appointing commissioners that clearly have campaigned and are members of political parties in their previous life, perhaps even in their recent life. It doesn't inspire confidence in the electoral process. So Nigerians want to see individuals in INEC that are not members of political parties or even former members of political parties, or individuals that have integrity. And there are a lot of Nigerians with integrity. This process where we are capturing INEC at all levels by infiltrating the commission by people who have partisan leanings does not inspire confidence in Nigerians, and it also delegitimizes the outcomes of elections, because there's a reason why umpires are required to be non-partisan and neutral. When you have individuals whose integrity and partisanship is tainted, all you simply do is have elections managed by politicians. And that is not the whole conceptualization of what an election management body should be. That's what Nigerians have said. We hope the president will listen. We also hope the National Assembly will listen. But let me say this in conclusion, that the INEC chairman leaves in December. By December, we will be practically 1 year into the 2027 elections. Therefore, the president needs to ensure that the appointment process is done early so that the National Assembly can confirm, so we don't have any delay as to the transition between this current chairman and the next INEC chairman.
All right. Mr. Itodo, I needed you to also realize, as to wind up, have less than a minute, so if you can do this in 30 seconds, if you will, on the issue of how to reverse low voter turnout.
I think the only way to reverse low voter turnout, one, you need to audit our voters register so we have the accurate figure of the number of people who are on our voters register. Secondly, we need government to deliver the dividends of democracy to the people. You need improved governance outcomes. And I say thirdly, we need to jettison the use of the PVCs. Nigerians have said that you can use other forms, legally acceptable forms of identification. This thing where we say no PVCs, no vote is obsolete. The BVAS has the voters register. Nigerians who have their NIMSI ID or their international passport should be allowed to vote at elections, so that this no PVC, no vote that is used to disenfranchise people, although the initial rationale is to sanitize the process, is now obsolete. Let's drop that and look at a way of ensuring once your name is on the voters register and you have a legally acceptable means of identification, you should be allowed to vote. That way you would see more people show up to cast their vote.
All right, Mr. Itodo, I'm told we have a bit more time. So you talked about the new INEC, and if that means, you know, removing the appointment process of the chair and electoral commissioners from the apron strings of the presidency, can we begin to reflect on, you know, what the body language would be of that office from what former President Goodluck Jonathan said, you know, at that reflection conference organized by your group just a few days ago, where he said INEC chairs must begin to resign. Is it fully representative of, you know, what should be a more honest conversation coming from a former president, you know, whose exit from office had much to do also, you know, with the same man that was in the room? If you catch my drift of what I'm trying to say, Mr. Itodo.
You're absolutely, Bukola, you're right. Yes, this week we hosted a regional conference just to reflect on the elections that are held in West Africa. And I think there is a consensus that the independence of electoral commissions is central to electoral democracy, is also central to political legitimacy. You cannot have an electoral commission that is subject, you know, to the directive and the dictates of the incumbent. What we've seen across the region is this excessive use of incumbency powers. And, you know, it's quite interesting that both gentlemen have a relationship because, yes, President Jonathan appointed Professor Jega, but both of them, you know, in their remark, actually reiterated the need to ensure the independence of the Electoral Commission. If you look across the last 10 years, 3 things have happened to INEC. The first one is that its financial independence, have been undermined. Nigerians will be shocked to know that as we speak today, INEC has not received its full money for the 2023 elections. This is 2 years down the line. The way to undermine an electoral commission is to starve the commission of its funding for elections. And so it's not just the appointment, it's also the financial independence. And so we need to look at both the operational independence and the financial independence of the commission. And we are worried that one way that INEC is being captured and will continue to be captured if you don't have political leaders who act as statesmen is to deprive the Electoral Commission of funding to conduct elections. The second relates to this appointment. And President Jonathan was very clear that if the incumbent mounts pressure on commissioners, the chairman or resident electoral commissioner, the most honorable thing to do is to resign. We don't have a culture, of resignation in our own context. You cannot, put yourself in a position where you compromise your standards and your principles. And this is why we need individuals who have the courage to resist the political interference, from incumbents or even political actors into INEC. If INEC is independent, I bet you the kind of leaders, Geoffrey, you talked about, who are not qualified to be even hold local government chairmanship positions will not make it into public office. Right. And I think that when people have trust in the Electoral Commission, some of the excesses that we see will not be in our political process. Look at the political parties.
Interestingly, they're already passing votes of confidence here and there. So very interesting days and months ahead of us. Look forward to who will become the next chairman of INEC. But we have to thank you so much for the yeoman's job, for keeping these conversations on the front burner. We've been speaking with the executive director of Yaga Africa, Samson Itodo. Thank you once again.